Greetings, brothers and sisters. So this is the Sahaj Marg website. This is the original website. The original name of the Heartfulness System is Sahaj Marg. You can find this website. And under Sahaj Marg worldwide, they have celebrations and gatherings. And this is Lalaji's birthday, which is coming up in February. And they have the timings for the sitting, which is February 15th at 7 a.m. So it's going to be February 14th in American time. And if you convert that to East Coast time, there's a time converter here. I'll leave a link in the description box to this webpage here. And there's a local time converter, and it'll be Hyderabad, India at 7 a.m. is 8:30 February 14th. So Sunday, February 14th at 8:30 p.m. there will be a sitting, a meditation. So that'll be this coming weekend, this coming Sunday. And that'll be the first meditation of the gathering. I'm not sure if they're going to leave the videos up so you can do it later, or, they used to do that. I'm not sure they're going to do that now. So we'll see what happens with that. But in terms of if you want to meditate at the same time, it used to be you could watch the video and meditate whenever especially since oftentimes it's too early or too late because of Indian time. Going back to the Sahaj Marg webpage, you see that the two nighttime sittings will be at 5 p.m. Indian time, and that translates to 6:30 p.m. East Coast time. We're going to go back to the time converter here. So you see it's 6:30 a.m. So that would be 4 hours earlier on the West Coast. So that would be a little bit tough for some people to wake up at 2:30 a.m. in the morning and meditate. And so I'm not sure if they're going to leave the videos up. I'm not sure how they're doing it this particular gathering, but hopefully they'll leave the videos up so that you can meditate at your convenience. And so for those of you who aren't aware of how the Heartfulness System works, there are these things called sittings where you meditate on your heart. You meditate on the supposition of divine light in the heart, or the feeling of God's love in the heart. And while you're doing that, there is a transmission and cleaning that is done. A transmission is God's love, the utilization of the divine energy for the transformation of man. It's also called pranahuti. Prana is, this energy, this creative force, God's love that's in everybody's system. And this energy is freely given, as the cleaning is freely done by the master of the system or trainers of the Heartfulness System. And so during these gatherings, there's 4 bandaras or gatherings, spiritual gatherings, that take place on the birthdays of the masters of the system. And the first master of the Heartfulness System, Lalaji, his birthday is in February. He was also born on Basant, which is the spring holiday in India. And so they actually changed when his birthday is celebrated. Sometimes they celebrate it on Basant, and sometimes they celebrate on February 2nd, because the holiday is switched. The holiday changes. But some of you might remember there was a sitting on February 2nd on his birthday, which, that's why. That's why there's these two things that happen. So this year they're celebrating the gathering on the Basant holiday. And now there are these 5 meditations that are given, these 5 satsangs, these group meditations that are being done. And they come in a sequence. The 5 sittings are, each one builds on the previous one. They're episodic, right? Like episodes of a TV show or something. And it's work that's going to happen. So it's spiritual work that's happening inside of you. And it has a set of steps. Each one of the group meditations is a set of steps for the spiritual work to be done. And then it might take months for the spiritual work to settle inside somebody's internal system. And so one of my viewers who's been doing the Heartfulness meditation asked some questions about having thoughts in meditation, and you're taught, or some of the explanation of how you do the Heartfulness meditation is you're focusing on your heart. Your attention is subtly put towards your heart. So using your mind, your thought force, and you're focusing on your heart region. And if thoughts come, you're supposed to treat them like uninvited guests or like barking dogs. If your mind drifts away and you stop thinking about your heart, you're not. And it's not thinking about your heart. It's your consciousness is on your heart. Like, let's say you have your knee hurts, right? Or you have a headache, and your headache is like in the back of your skull, or somewhere specific behind your eyes or something, right? You have a pain there, you have a pain in your knee or a pain in your foot. You're focusing on that area, right? An area that you never think about. You're not in your daily, going through your daily activities. You're not thinking about your knee or thinking about your ankle. But if you have an injury, you have a pain in one of those places, your attention is brought to that place, right? You move your focus away from whatever you're doing. You could be watching a TV show and your focus is outside of your body. It's on the external world. Your focus can be on your work. It can be on your, watching TV. It could be on the computer. It could be on your phone. But if you have a pain internally, you have some pain, whatever it might be, then your focus is going to be drawn back to that spot, back to that particular point in your body, that area where you feel the pain, right? And so your mind might drift away and you're not thinking about the pain, but then all of a sudden you remember it, or, it hurts worse or something like this. There's a great story when someone went to visit Babaji, the second master of the system, who was, described by people who met him as really like an innocent child. And he would say things very innocently. And he had an ulcer. He had a really painful ulcer for about, I think, 15 to 20 years. It was, it would be excruciating for most people to bear the pain. And one day he was sitting with some of the practitioners of the system. And one of them said, Babaji, how is your ulcer feeling? He said, oh, I forgot all about it till you mentioned it, He didn't say it, he said it in a nice way, but, like people ask, how is this and how is that? But Babaji was thinking about other things and he was distracted from the pain. But then when the person asked him about it, he felt the pain of the thing. And so when you're doing the heartfulness meditation, it's not a mantra. You're not saying divine light in the heart or God's love in the heart. And, it's a feeling more than a thought, right? It is, you're feeling whatever you're experiencing more than you're seeing it or more than you're thinking about it in terms of thought form, right? Because there's something that's thought form. You can think of God as a thought, right? God is words. God is a word. God is a thought. Or you can feel God's love in your heart. And the feeling of God's love in the heart is far superior because then you actually feel the essence of the person. Like you could say somebody's name over and over again in a mantra, somebody you miss, somebody you love, and then, you could think about them, picture them, think of some memories with them, or you could be physically with them. And being physically with them is better, right? But the memories are also, a part of that because you can be experiencing their essence. Like somebody who died years ago, you could think about them and have some memories of them, and you could actually feel what it's like to be with them. So it's not like that isn't anything, but it isn't as good as being with them physically or being with them, in terms of connecting with them, right? You could be thinking about them, they could be thinking about you, or you could be talking on the phone, or you could be physically, in each other's presence, and those things all are, there's levels to the connectivity. And so what the heartfulness system does is bring God's love, your awareness of God's love through the transmission. God's love is in your heart, and it brings it to the forefront. And at these gatherings, it's easier to feel God's love for a lot of reasons. And I won't get into those, but it's just a better time to feel the transmission and feel the energy. But in terms of what this person was asking, and I thought I would answer these questions, so everybody, I'm sure other people are having these experiences. There are times where you have thoughts in meditation that come from God, that come from the meditation, that come from the transmission. Like a lot of the information I present here on this YouTube channel comes from the meditation. I'll be meditating and ideas will be there that, maybe I'll be concentrating on something. I'll be thinking about an event or something that's going on. And, maybe, the day before, and I won't be thinking about it, or whatever when I'm meditating, but all of a sudden information about that will come, right? There'll be a flow of information that comes. And as time goes on, the flow of information is there just on a daily basis. Whenever I'm concentrating on something, I'll get into a meditative state. I could be watching the news or whatever, just sort of scrolling through the internet, which is also sort of a meditative action. And reading can be that as well, especially when, for years the first couple of years when I started the Heartfulness Meditation, I read books like 2 or 3 hours a day. There was so much, information in these books, and I reread books. And then after a while, I would start reading the book and I'd go into a meditative state. Like my mind would drift and I had trouble focusing on the words. In fact, someone said that to me because I read some of the Whispers messages in recent videos, and the person said they were glad to have me read them because whenever they read the Whispers messages, their mind drifts, and that's because there's so much transmission in the heartfulness literature, the Sajmarg literature, that when you're reading it, you can go into a meditative state, but also reading other things or sometimes listen to videos or whatever it is, especially here where there's a connection between, me and the system, so that there's this energy there. But even without the energy, after a while, when you start meditating through the heartfulness system, lots of things will put you into a meditative state. A meditative state is just there's like the alpha waves and the beta waves in terms of your brain waves, and your brain has different functions, like your computer has sleep mode and, whatever it is, right? You have these active ways of, your brain has active phases. If you're doing something physical, you have to be aware, right? If you're in a heightened state of awareness, like you're driving through a snowstorm and it's dangerous and your car's sliding out, or you're doing something that's, like high stress and you're in, your adrenaline's kicking in, your brain is in a much more active mode, right? But you could be driving on a desert highway where there's no cars in sight and you get into a meditative state and you're like sort of in a daydreamy sort of state. And so there's these various ways that there's these various states your brains go into, and meditation is just one of them. When people say, well, meditation's bad, lots of, misinformation about that, but meditation is a natural state of being. And you can meditate or ruminate over any number of things. A guy will meditate over his girlfriend, or a girl will meditate over his or boyfriend or husband or something. Or, if you're missing somebody or you're worried about somebody, or you're just, you can be in some relaxed state out in nature, sitting somewhere and the sun is setting and you just get into a meditative state. You're not self-conscious, like you're not, aware like you might be, right? Like when you go into a new environment, your first day of school, your first day at work, or a first date with somebody, you're very self-conscious, you're very aware of yourself, you're uncomfortable because you're around strangers and you're not in a comfortable setting, and so you're not going to be in a relaxed meditative state. But when you're around people and it's routine and your guard isn't up, then you're in a different sort of a state, right? And so in terms of the meditation, the heartfulness system, it's not about having thoughtless meditations. It's not about samadhi, where you go into a deep state, like a sleep-like state. In the heartfulness system, people get into the samadhi state relatively quickly because of the transmission. I mean, some people do it in the first sittings. Some people do it, after a year or so. But after a while, you're going to experience samadhi, which is, used to be one of the highest states, or the highest state of Patanjali's yoga. But in Sajmarg, in the heartfulness system, it's there, and it's helpful to be in samadhi. I mean, you'll feel refreshed and you'll feel great. It's a great way of recharging and connecting to the divine. But there's another goal in the heartfulness system, which is beyond the samadhi state, and that's where you are, getting into these meditative states all the time, and with that, you are connecting with God, and you're, even after the meditation, that connection with God continues until the next meditation. So the goal would be a constant state of awareness of God and connection with God, where you're, in and out of the physical world, where part of you is always meditating on God. Part of you is always connected to God. It's part of your consciousness. See, your you're splitting your consciousness up in a sense where you're able to function and do your job, but meanwhile in the back of your mind, or in the, in terms of your, the recesses of your heart, you're still loving God and you're still connecting to God and wanting to serve God. So that's going on. Like there's two channels going on in terms of, watching more than one channel on your TV at the same time. You're functioning and doing your work, but at the same time, you're meditating as well, even though you're, and it's not something you try right off the bat. I don't know, it's something that develops naturally, but you're in this state of what they call constant remembrance of God, where you're remembering God all the time and eventually loving God all the time, but you're still doing your work and functioning and fulfilling your responsibilities and things. There's a great talk given by the third master of the heartfulness system who said, he compared it to a whale that dives into the depths of the ocean and then comes up and takes a breath and then dives back down. And so that your consciousness is diving inwards like the whale, where you're going inside, connecting to your heart, and you come up, take a breath, you deal with whatever you have to deal with. Somebody asks you a question, and your consciousness is pulled back up into the external world, and you dive back down. And so you're in this deep meditative state almost all the time, but you're still able to function on a high level, and you're still able to do what you need to do on a physical level. There was this time, like I hadn't played basketball. I used to play basketball 3 hours a night, every night, like for years, through the later years of high school and when I was in college and things. And so when I started the heartfulness meditation, I was 29 years old, and I was sort of not playing basketball as much. Like I wouldn't play for 6 months at a time or whatever it was. And I went to Sunday meditation. I had a good meditation, and I was driving home. This is by UMass, University of Massachusetts. And there was a park there, sort of a street ball park. And they always had like college level players there. I mean, it was high level competition. And Sunday was a big day at the park. And I drove by and I saw people playing basketball. I was like, I'm just going to play, right? And it was like, almost lunchtime, but I just felt like playing basketball. And I was in this really meditative state, really good state after the group meditation. And I went out and I was just like, they talk about the game slowing down, and that's a phrase used in sports where you're just, instead of being in a rat race and being frenetic and running around like a chicken with your head cut off, the game just slows down, and it seems like everybody else is moving in slow motion. You're in the zone, and like it was probably the best basketball I ever played in my life. I was just, in this wonderful state from the meditation, and I was still like retaining that state, but also engaged in basketball. And I didn't even like care about the game. Like I wasn't being competitive like I normally would, because when you lose in street ball, when you go to a park, you have to call next game, and if there's 20 people waiting to play, you might as well go home. So you have to win to stay on the court. The losing team leaves and the winner stays on, and a new team comes and competes against the team that's on there. But we ended up winning. The team I was on ended up winning like 6 or 7 games against like high level competition that was there that day. And like I was like the best player. It was like, I was having like a moment, right? And, and that's how I think about the heartfulness system, in a way that it helps people get into the zone of life. Instead of being self-conscious or being, frazzled or fragmented, it helps you to like drop down and get deeper into your, soul's reason for being here. And, this idea of being self-conscious is sort of, to me, the opposite of what the heartfulness system helps people achieve. Being self-conscious is being disconnected, right? You're a new person, a new environment, and you don't feel connected with everybody, and you're sort of defensive and whatever it is, and you're, worried about how people are perceiving you, or, somebody maybe makes a joke or something, you start about you, and you become self-conscious about whatever it is. And like that's in a way hell, right? You're disconnected from everything and everybody. You're not in the flow and things like this. And so in the heartfulness system, when you meditate, it is really to get into that state, like a God consciousness state where you're aware of God and you're feeling God's love, but you're also able to conduct your activities. Like you're not going off to some, mountain retreat, some ashram somewhere, and meditating for 18 years like people, used to do. You still have to engage and be in your, be in your physical life, be in your, doing your duties and things, family and work and whatever it might be. But you're still able to, be a practitioner of, a godly meditation whilst you're doing those things. And so, you might have distracting thoughts, right? When you're going into you're going to have thoughts. And some of those thoughts are just things that are, you've been thinking about or worried about, whatever's going on. And, some of those thoughts are things that are being cleaned from your system. Like something's being cleaned, and you might, think about like some impression you had, was something that happened to you that left an impression. And that's what's being cleaned. And so you might remember that. So you don't want to remember it because you'll just be making it, you'll just be increasing the impression. So you want to let that go. But other times there'll be information coming from God. And it's not always that easy to distinguish. And sometimes you'll get into a daydreamy state and you're not really thinking about your heart anymore. And there'll be this information coming from God, and maybe you'll be getting instructions. And it isn't always going to be crystal clear what's coming from God or what's coming from you. Like you might have doubts, did I think that or did God, because it's now God is a part of your thought process, right? There is in your soul in a sense, right? Because you have an ego and a soul. And so there is now no longer some sense of, did that come from me or did that come from God, or, what's the difference in the thing, in terms of what I'm supposed to do, or was I really, sometimes it's wishful thinking. You're asking God a question and then your ego answers it and you're like, yeah, that's what I wanted to hear. And so it's a little bit difficult. It's something you have to learn to do, right? You have to learn to differentiate. They had in the DSM-4 and now the DSM-5, they would have similar diagnoses, like the borderline personality disorder versus the narcissistic personality disorder, or something, would be like schizophrenia versus schizotypal type of personality. They have all these various diagnoses that are similar. And so they have what's called a differential diagnosis, where they tell you, how you can tell the difference between one thing or another. This symptom will be here, but not over here, right? So you have these various types of differential diagnoses where you can tell the difference between one psychological pathology and another. And so in a similar way, you have to become more sensitive, and, the art of listening to the inner voice. If the inner voice is God, what if it's, some other negative disembodied soul? Because all of these things, you're opening up your heart, and sometimes it's God, sometimes it's your ego, sometimes it's some other spiritual essence or entity that might not be positive. Maybe it's a saint, maybe it's not a saint, right? So, it could be a negative soul, or what people would call a demon. So as you, are doing this, you have to just become more refined and better at it over time, because you're opening up more and more and you're being brought to higher levels of spirituality and your system's being purified. And so you have to just get better at it by practicing. This is something Babaji used to always say. He would say the work teaches. You learn to meditate by meditating. You don't read a book to meditate. I mean, books can be helpful, but you still have to do it. You have to apply it. Meditating is doing. There's this idea in Heartfulness system that prayer is begging and meditating is receiving. Where a prayer, you're asking God for something, and in meditation, God's giving you something. When Babaji first started making preceptors to give these sittings and have transmission come, there was no books available. Like, he wrote 5 books, and he didn't want to write books. Everyone was like, well, you got to write some books. And he's like, I'm not a book writer. I'm not an author. And he went into a deep meditative state, and he wrote these 5 books. They're about 120 pages long. But he wrote them from, like, the divine source gave him this information. Like, he went into this deep state of meditation, and this is what came out, these books, right? And they're, brilliant books. In the Sajmarg website for bookstore, you can find them under Complete Works of Ramchandra, Volume 1. Those are the 5 books that Babaji wrote: Reality at Dawn, The Efficacy of Raja Yoga, Towards Infinity, the 10 Maxims of Sahaj Marg Philosophy. And these are all available where you can read them online. I'll leave a link in the description box to that under the link, the first link. I'll leave a link to the ebooks, and you can click on the link that says the complete works of Ramchandra is on the bottom of the links. I'll show you this in a video. I'll do a separate video about that. But these books are available. But anyways, Babaji didn't write any books. There wasn't books available, and people were doing the meditation, and they wanted books. And he would make preceptors, and he'd say, go work, right? He would give them this preceptor sittings, which was deep cleaning, and he would transmit and charge spiritual points, and he wouldn't tell them what to do. He wouldn't have a conversation explaining how to give a sitting, because now they were supposed to transmit to people and clean their hearts and, just do this work. And if the preceptor didn't know what they were doing, the sitting would happen automatically. So it was something where Babaji didn't worry about the ability of the preceptor to do the work, and he would give the sittings with the person. His spiritual essence would be there with the preceptor giving the sittings. I mean, that was always the case, but very specifically in the beginning. There's a story from a preceptor who was from Sri Lanka, which is an island, basically the Cuba of India. It's right where Cuba would be in relationship to America. It's 50 miles off the east coast of India, just like Cuba is in relationship to Florida. But anyways, this guy was made a preceptor, and he was about to fly home, and he was supposed to give the Sunday sitting, which is a big deal. Lots of people there, some thousands of people. And he didn't know what to do. He just sat down, and all of a sudden the sitting started to take place, and he could see all of it, right? Then he knew how to, give sittings and do these things. But in the beginning, there was no instructions. Now there's these preceptor books, these various volumes of preceptor works and things that explain how to give sittings and things. But at first, there was nothing. And Babaji would just say, the work will teach. And Babaji had such a vivid and, he had this internalized experience of his spiritual journey where he just saw all of it and he understood it and he was very conscious of it. In fact, he anticipated the next step on his spiritual journey before it actually happened, going through these various spiritual points and the conditions and things there and cleaning and stuff that needed to happen. He experienced all these things ahead of time. And so he figured other people would be like that. But there were some problems. There was a guy who made a preceptor, and Babaji went over his house, and the guy had a picture of Babaji on the wall, and it was, in the 40s. I mean, it was not a very, quality picture right back in the 40s. And he had people coming to his house meditating in front of the picture instead of sitting there with them and giving them a sitting. And Babaji said, no, I did this spiritual work on you so you could give the sittings. And so what Babaji hoped for, or what he thought was going to happen, was that people would start doing the work and they would figure out what was going on and they would be able to help with these sittings as well, right? Because there was a divine essence, Babaji's divine essence was in the people. The master of the system's essence is there giving the sittings, but also the person can contribute. Because when you're cleaning somebody's heart, the way it works in a sitting is the person transmits to the other person, the person receiving the sitting, and they'll get either a visual image or they'll feel something in the person's heart region. They'll see an obstruction or something that has to be removed, and they will use their will force to remove whatever has to be removed. And so basically what you're doing is, it's like you're cleaning a floor with your mind, right? When you're mopping a floor, you're sweeping the floor, right? You're doing that with your physical body. But in a sitting, a preceptor is doing that in somebody else's heart. They're cleaning away things that shouldn't be there, like whatever it is, things that are obstructing the person's spiritual path. And so it takes concentration, will force. And again, like if the person would fall asleep or they go into a meditative state themselves, the preceptor, the master of the system's also there giving the sitting as well. So it's an interesting process. But what I'm saying is that, you get good at this by experiencing it and doing it. You get good at meditating by meditating, and then you have to, note things in your diary. And it's one of the ways that the diary is, helpful for people is that you know things in your diary and you go back, you might read things later on, read your previous entries and just say, oh, wow, there was progress that's being made, thoughts that come and things like this. And you're teaching yourself how to do this process, but the transmission and cleaning is there. And the consciousness, the energy, the master of the system's soul, in a sense, is there with the practitioners of the system, helping to guide them. And that's why it's like, they give the example of, in the heartfulness system, in terms of the various motherhoods out there, it's more like a turtle that lays its eggs on the beach and then swims back in the ocean. And the turtles are there, the mother's consciousness. I mean, not, a turtle, but in terms of the heartfulness system is there, right? The master's consciousness is with the person, nurturing them, right? Being with them on their spiritual journey, even though they're not in physical contact. Even though the master of the system might not be aware, probably isn't aware of what's going on, but there's this consciousness. The consciousness can be all over the world. Your mind can expand to be, out in a universal type of situation, and your heart can expand to be a universal heart, where your heart is everywhere. Where your etheric heart, right now you have a sphere. People have a sphere, like electromagnetic sphere of their heart region, like their heart energy. Your spiritual heart is, maybe a foot or two around your body, right? You have this, and your mental consciousness is, with you, right? But sometimes when your mental consciousness is thinking about, a loved one somewhere far off, your mental consciousness can expand, right? Let's say somebody is taking a trip, a loved one's taking a trip, and you're worried about them, and you're just thinking about them the whole time, or your son is off at war, or your daughter or something is away at college, and you're with them, right? You're worried about them, or they're going through something, or they're sick or something, and you can't be with them physically, but you can wrap them in like a bubble of love, like a bubble of consciousness, right? And so there's this, element where your mind and your heart can expand far beyond, the little region that it's occupying now. Like when they've done things where they've tortured or killed baby rabbits far away from the mother, and the mother senses it and reacts and has emotional reaction. That's just some rabbit, right? I mean, they've done experiments on this sort of thing. And so your consciousness, as you're doing the heartfulness meditation, expands, and your heart expands, and you end up having a universal heart. That's what the masters of the system have. And it can't be contained by time and space. That's why these sittings are not, you can watch a video from 3 years ago, a YouTube video where Daji's conducting a sitting, you can still feel the transmission. You're like, how is that possible? When the sitting was given 3 years ago, but I can feel the transmission today. Why is that? Because the transmission is beyond time and space. It's beyond the fourth dimension, right? It's beyond the kind of, the limitations of the 3D world that we live in. So when you're doing these sittings, the people who are going to be doing these sittings on, on Basant, Lalaji's birthday, you'll feel the transmission, even though the transmission's coming, you think it's coming from India. You think the sittings are being given from India because, they're in Hyderabad, the master of the system's in Hyderabad, but they're really coming from another dimension, right? They're coming from God, right? The source of all things. And so you could be experiencing the sitting, but someone else in your house isn't. You can feel a transmission, but your neighbor isn't feeling the transmission because they're not flipping a switch and connecting to it. And so even though the sitting is happening in Hyderabad, India, you can also feel it wherever you are. It's not because the internet, it's not coming over the internet. It's not coming through the video itself. It's not coming through the screen. You're watching Daji give the sitting. It's not coming through your computer or your phone or something. And so it's, it's something you have to contemplate and experience. And Babaji's goal was that everyone would figure it out for themselves. You would figure out what it was coming from and what it was and how it worked and, whatever was going on in terms of the spiritual work, because there's specific spiritual work that's going on in every one of these group and individual sittings that you receive. There's specific cleaning that's happening, and then there's the spiritual journey, the yatra of the soul. The yatra means journey in Sanskrit. And your soul goes through these various points in the heartfulness system. It goes through the heart region, the mind region, and then into the central region, which it's going, through an internal process on a spiritual realm of existence. And some people are going to be more visual than others. Some people are going to feel things more than other people, right? They're going to feel the transmission more acutely. And everyone becomes more sensitive as they do the system. And the hope is at some point people are completely aware of the work that's happening. And that's the goal of the system, that you're becoming more acutely aware because you're going into this meditative state, and you go to the spiritual realm of existence, and you see the work that's being done while these sittings are going on. And after the sitting, you understand what you were given, right, in terms of the sitting and your spiritual journey, right? You'll start feeling cleaning happening in various spiritual points, opening up, like what Babaji called these knots, right? Some of these things are, they're knots that have to be opened up in terms of, your soul going through this spiritual yatra. And there's also plugging into the Ethernet. So when I make these videos, I plug into the Ethernet. There's plugging into the internet, right? I do the internet research, but also there's getting into this meditative state and allowing information to flow to me and into me from the system. And so that's why, like, you'll see different information and a different orientation in my videos, because the heartfulness system allows somebody to plug into the divine consciousness where, the Akashic records are there, and you can get insights and information, so it's a spiritual process. So it's not like, as concrete as doing physical research or doing internet research or doing research with your mind. And so it's abstract, and it takes some interpretation, right? In terms of these messages from the Whispers of the Brighter World books, where this French woman was intercommuning with Babaji and other higher developed souls, and they were giving her these messages. Sometimes, there was a language issue when they were translating because she took down the messages in French, and then they had to be translated into English. But sometimes, she would be limited in some of the things that she knew. And so he would transmit the essence of the thought, and she wouldn't be able to put it into language, or she didn't have the conceptual ability. Like, for example, there was a young scientist back in the 40s or 50s or whatever it was that went up to Babaji and said, well, what do you see, right? What did you, and it was a new person, and he was, testing Babaji out or whatever. And so Babaji didn't know what the guy did. Like, he didn't know he was a scientist, and he didn't know anything about molecular science as a human being, but he had this image that came to him, and he drew it like on the sand on the ground, right? And what he drew was like an atom, the proton and the neutron, all this stuff, like the molecular structure of an atom. And this was new information that was just like, they were just finding it out at the time, and they're in rural India. And this guy is stunned. He's amazed. He goes, how do you know this? This is stuff they're just discovering in science. And Babaji goes, yeah, you have your books. I have my mythology, right? His spiritual master. Like he was just given this image, and he just drew it, didn't really know what it was, right? But in terms of, proving to this young man that this, he had different types of spiritual capabilities in the system that he was using because of his ability to give that person exactly what he wanted, right? What he needed as a scientific student. But he himself didn't know what he was seeing. So it's going to be different for each person. If you have some field of expertise, like I do truther stuff, right? And so it's easier for me to understand the information coming from the source than other people who do the heartfulness system, because they're not truthers. They haven't ever homesteaded. They don't have, they're not dyslexic. They don't have, whatever it is, right? My own personality configuration. But if there was something, mathematical or to do with any number of subjects that I don't know anything about, it'd be harder for me to receive the information because it comes in message form and then it goes into English, right? When Babaji transmits the messages to this French woman, or when he used to transmit these messages to the French woman, he didn't transmit them in French. He transmitted them in thought, right? In divine thought. But she interpreted through her own language, because we all have our own languages. And so sometimes the message is a little bit lost because it's being interpreted by a language that doesn't really have the right grammatical configuration. You understand this? Because, for example, English is the language of business. English is a good language for business. Sanskrit is the original language that came from the divine source. And so it's the language of spirituality, right? So each language has its, like, there's love languages and romantic languages, and each language has its own limitations in really being able to connect to the truth of things, because sometimes the language itself can't really communicate the essence of something that's truthful. Like, for example, in Persia, in the Persian language, there's something like 34 words for love, right? And in English, there's one, And so in terms of the heartfulness meditation, the transmission is coming from the divine source, and it's pure in its form. And the way that you interpret it, the way that you're able to perceive what you're receiving, and the way that you're able to do it correctly is something that, you have to work at. Like, that's what each person has to do. Each person has to figure out what's going on with the sittings, and, you should be learning more and more and understanding the process, and, information, allowing information to come to you, and, just purifying your own ability to interpret these things. And over time, that'll happen if you practice correctly. Like anything else, it's just punching the clock. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.